Hello, this is Patrick Barnard in Montreal. This is the 7th International Press Review for March 14, 2025. And today we're looking at Trump's tariff war with the world, the Canadian part of the story.
Canada is not the one putting your jobs at risk. Canada is not the one that is ultimately starting this war. President Trump's tariffs against you are causing that. And there are no winners in a trade war.
Mélanie Joly, Canada's foreign minister, speaking to television on Wednesday, March 12th. This story is moving very quickly. It's kind of fascinating. The Canadian cabinet, the Canadian leadership is presenting the classic economic case against tariffs. Joly was saying that a trade war, a tariff war, leads to very bad consequences for everybody, and nobody wins. This is the lesson of the 1920s and 1930s that one would have thought people had learnt by now. Joly is reminding people what's at stake. Mélanie Joly today, Friday, March 14th, is outside of Quebec City at a meeting of the G7 where the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, when asked about tariffs, said that the United States was, in effect, waging a tariff war against the whole world. Joly's message is tariff wars restrict trade and cause possible recessions, if not even depressions. Another Canadian minister was on the airwaves, TV waves in midweek, and that was Chrystia Freeland, the very brilliant financial mind who is working to defend Canada. And she stressed another point, that tariffs cause inflation.
Just been hearing about the inflation numbers and talking about there being a risk that with the trade war, inflation will go up. It's not a risk. It is a certainty.
Added to the problems of recessionary economic forces and inflation is the very erratic personality of Donald Trump. David Eby is the Premier of British Columbia. Canada is a very federated kind of structure or state. Now, Mr. Eby has passed emergency legislation to help him deal with the consequences of American policy, including, for example, tearing up a water agreement. Here's what he said about predicting Trump's behavior.
I wish I could say we could predict what the president is going to do next, but I don't think anyone can predict that. I'm not even sure the president can predict what he's going to do next. And so we need to have the tools in place to be able to respond quickly.
What is Canada dealing with? What is the world dealing with? Well, not only President Trump's unpredictability and erratic behavior, but also a very planned contempt for others, contempt for Europe and contempt for the sovereignty of Canada, as we hear in this clip.
Just a straight artificial line. Somebody did it a long time ago, many, many decades ago, and makes no sense. It's so perfect as a great and cherished state.
March 14, 2025. Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England and of the Bank of Canada, is sworn in as the new Canadian Prime Minister, and the first thing he does is to say that in no way is Canada ever going to join the United States.
Our leaner cabinet will focus on two priorities in particular. First, protecting Canadian workers and their families in the face of unjustified foreign trade actions. And second, growing this great country by putting more money in Canadians' pockets.
Right now, the tariff situation between the United States and Canada is murky and complex, tariffs and counter-tariffs. A lot of this is rhetoric, but some of it is very real, such as, now in March, the 25% U.S. tariff on steel and aluminum.
Security is a priority for this government, reinforcing our security, as is diversifying our trading and commercial relationships. Of course, with both Europe and the United Kingdom, there are many opportunities. And as I said a moment ago in my remarks, there are historic ties. With respect to The president, I don't have plans to go to the United States. I look forward to speaking to him at the appropriate moment. Thank you.
The video clip that you've just seen shows Mark Carney in the front and over his right shoulder, Chrystia Freeland. The placement of those two people was no accident in Ottawa. They're the two people who will be handling the tariff dossier for Canada. Chrystia Freeland was also the person who renegotiated the free trade accord between Canada and the United States in 2018, and she did the negotiating with Donald Trump pretty successfully. It's that new agreement that the Americans are threatening to break in all kinds of ways. In 2018, Trump called Freeland that nasty woman. Why? Because she was successful in her negotiations. The Nobel Prize-winning American economist Paul Krugman has a Substack. It's really interesting reading. In the past 10 days, he joked, but he was being serious about Trump having imposed tariffs higher than suggested, then unimposed, reimposed, and unimposed them. And Krugman was making a point about the instability that this has caused in financial markets. But Krugman also spoke with a trade expert called Mary E. Lovely, and she pointed out to Krugman that Trump probably didn't know before all of this kerfuffle about what the car market is really like in the United States. She said there's no such thing as an American car, it's a North American car. And if Trump goes through with all his tariff threats, what will happen is, in her words, quote, a gigantic destruction of assets, unquote. In other words, a huge number of people in North America will lose money. The picture you see on the screen is what I've just been reading, actually rereading, because I've read it about 3 times. It's a user's guide to restructuring the global trade system. Now, this time around, Canada, rather than in 2018, has a lot on its plate. In the International Press Review number 5, I talked about this document. It is written by Stephen Miran. He's now the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. It was up on a hedge fund, Hudson's Bay Capital, the one where he used to work. That's the only way I found it. It is a very daunting document. It involves massive changes in tariffs, in defense, and above all, in the financial system. Now, what Miran and his colleague at Treasury, Scott Bessent, are proposing is a devaluation of the American dollar and a revaluation of rival currencies. This, they admit themselves, is a very tricky procedure. Both Miran and Bessent have a background in hedge funds. One of the proposals, for example, that they're thinking of is to get people who have T-bills, treasury bills, because that's the world currency. People who have T-bills, they're going to find ways to either tax them or pressure them to convert those T-bills into long-term bonds. But this has all been done so aggressively that the cooperation that would be needed to completely restructure the world system just is not there.
I build a tower to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
It is fairly clear that there are factions within the Trump White House in Washington, D.C., but it is also clear that the Miran-Bessent duo call the shots as far as tariff policy is concerned. Their idea is to create a fortress USA, surrounded by tariff walls that will encourage or compel outside investors to jump over those tariff walls and install production facilities in the United States. At the same time, I believe they're deliberately destroying U.S. multilateralism as we have known it. Bessent has specifically written about, quote, more clearly segmenting the international economy into zones based on common security, unquote. The Miran-Bessent team wants to keep the hegemonic role of the United States dollar while simultaneously lowering the value of the dollar itself. That is clearly a contradiction. And if the scheme goes belly up, then you could have a run on the dollar, a run on the world reserve currency. Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland have their work cut out for them. Perhaps they will succeed in negotiating with Washington, but they have to really be wary of being locked up inside a very unpleasant fortress or block that does not serve the interests of their country. This is an extremely interesting situation. I'm going to end this press review by referring to a column in the Financial Times over this past weekend. Here it is. You can see it. It's written by Gillian Tett. She is the head of the editorial board at the Financial Times in London, a tremendous journalist. And this is the piece. I'm going to read it to myself and to you. Tariffs on goods may be a prelude to tariffs on money. That's the headline. This month, many investors feel dazed and confused. No wonder, as the U.S. government flirts with another shutdown and President Donald Trump intensifies his trade war. Indices of economic uncertainty have skyrocketed above even the 2030 pandemic or the global financial crisis of 2008. But the uncertainty could get worse, for amid all the tariff shocks, there is another question hovering. Could Trump's assault on free trade lead to attacks on free capital flows, too? Might tariffs on goods be a prelude to tariffs on money? This is Patrick Barnard with the 7th edition of the International Press Review.